Hello everyone, welcome to the Joby S4 orientation flight video. This video is designed to help you as a Microsoft Flight Simulator pilot become oriented to and operate the Joby S4 electric vertical takeoff and landing air vehicle. The Joby S4 is effectively an air taxi. It is piloted by a single crew and can carry up to 4 passengers and cargo with a useful weight of approximately 1,000 pounds. It is entirely powered by 6 electric motors and a redundant battery system. Moving towards the cockpit, we'll get a brief overview of the controls before we take flight. The cockpit should look familiar to most pilots. It has what appears to be a throttle quadrant on the left, control column or stick on the right, 2 screens comprising a glass cockpit, in this case the G3000 with some customizations, a single Garmin touch controller on the left, and an upfront controller in the center to control the combined primary flight display and multifunction display on the right side of the cockpit. Powering up the aircraft is a very simple procedure. It's actually one step. Click the master battery switch on the lower right, and we'll just need to wait for the Garmin to boot up. We'll have to press the enter button to get past the splash screen. As you can see, the right side is the primary flight control display combined with a moving map split screen. On the left is several sets of informational panels, as we call them, to give the pilot an idea of status, including their flight data, their power expenditure and power profile, and the state of the controls. This will change depending on whether the aircraft is in a hover mode or a forward flight, or what we call speed mode. And so this particular readout will change accordingly. On the right, standard Garmin PFD, no surprises there, and a moving map display. Things to note before we do anything else. You probably want to get rid of the V-speeds indication. We were limited by the ability to be able to program the PFD to get rid of that. So if that sort of detail tends to bother you a little bit, just simply go into performance on the GTC, go to the speed bugs, turn them all on. There's really no speed bug indication. It just makes the caution disappear, and away we go. One more thing before we get started, we'll turn on the exterior lights. You can map these to your standard keybinds in the sim, but for safety purposes, of course, we'll turn on strobe and navigation to indicate that we are intending engine start very shortly. Before we do, just a little bit more detail on this section of the display. The power indications here, because this is an electrically powered vehicle, this entire ring right here represents your entire energy state, meaning that's your battery power life. At the moment, because all we're doing is providing a hotel load to the aircraft, lights, environment, and the avionics, the endurance is set at maximum 180 minutes. We're drawing the minimum amount of power possible at the moment. That's 1 kilowatt energy draw. And of course our range is 0 because we are not moving. We are not expending any energy. We are not invoking any speed, altitude changes, etc. So that is your power setting. This is in a conventionally powered aircraft, that would be the total fuel you have left available. And so keep an eye on this, and we'll reference that throughout the orientation flight. One of the first things that sort of needs to get out of the way is, what are these controls like and how they operate depending upon whether you're in hover mode or conventional flight mode. These two controls are actually referred to in the industry as inceptors. They're very specialized fly-by-wire controls. There's no mechanical linkages at all to the aircraft power systems or flight controls or control surfaces. It's all the input that you provide in there is converted into electrical energy, and the flight systems interpret how much input you're applying to a given inceptor and interpreting that as a given power input or power decrease or a flight control surface change. Now, given that you're currently in hover mode, I need to point out that this yoke, which is referred to, these two inceptors are referred to by their positions: left-hand inceptor, LHI, right-hand inceptor, RHI. And the inceptors operate in different ways depending on which flight mode you're in, hover or forward flight. When you're in hover mode, the right-hand inceptor controls your translation, meaning that if I pitched back on this right-hand inceptor while I'm in hover mode, the Joby is going to translate straight up. It's going to lift straight up, no translation forward, backward, left, or right, or yaw. It's simply going to go straight up. If I push down on the inceptor while it's in hover mode, it's going to descend accordingly straight down. That's going to take a little bit of getting used to. If you want to think about it this way, if you're in hover mode, this control treats you just as if you were flying a drone remotely. Up and down translates you directly up and down like an elevator. Left and right will translate, will yaw your position, will translate the Joby left and right, meaning it will sidestep left or sidestep right. And if you twist it, there's a twist function on this, you will yaw, just like in a helicopter if you press the torque pedals. So you can change your nose heading just by simply twisting the right-hand inceptor. It'll make sense. This will become more, your muscle memory will get more accustomed to this the number of times you fly. And I can pretty much guarantee after about 2 flights, your muscle memory will get it. It just takes a little bit of readjustment mentally and muscle memory wise to get used to what this right-hand inceptor does when it's in hover mode. And once it's in forward flight mode, it operates just like any other side stick. Pitch back, you will climb. Pitch down, you will descend. Bank is a bank. You will aileron turn. Twist, and you'll get some rudder response, although I should point out that the rudder response in full forward flight isn't all that impressive, let's just put it that way. But that's how the Joby was designed. So that's the right-hand inceptor. The left-hand inceptor is a little bit more straightforward. It applies power, absolutely, but it will make more sense to you in forward flight. Full forward, you're going to apply power, full power to all 6 engine nacelles. Full aft, you will reduce or cut power. Any position in between, you're applying varying amounts of power. In hover mode, and this is the part that is the part that your muscle memory needs to train for. I encourage people to leave the left-hand inceptor or the power input midpoint. The easiest way to do this is to map this left-hand inceptor to any throttle axis hardware controller that you might have. I have a popular name brand 3-axis throttle quadrant, and this left-hand inceptor is mapped directly to the throttle, and so I will move my hardware controller, and as you can see, the left-hand inceptor is responding to that mechanical movement. And I instinctively tend to leave this midpoint of the throttle. You've got throttles that have markings on the throttle axes, and I just try to find the midpoint and just leave it there, because in hover mode, you really don't need to apply power. In fact, all of the power input is automatically going to be managed depending on what you do with the right-hand inceptor. Are you trying to climb? Are you trying to translate up? Are you trying to translate down? Are you trying to translate laterally? Are you trying to yaw and change your nose heading? But that will become very evident once we start flying. The last thing that I want to point out is that there are two battery modes on this aircraft. This first one is called the load, and as I mentioned before, all we're doing right now is providing a hotel load to the aircraft. Lights, environmental controls, power to the flight management system, any external lights that we might have turned on. That's it. So in order to get anything happening in the aircraft, you need to change the load to fly, and now the throttle, if you move it a little bit forward, the left-hand inceptor, you're seeing from the shadows, there you go, the engines have started up, the nacelles are responding forwards or backwards depending on how much power I'm applying to the right-hand inceptor. And we're going to do a ground taxi. You can do a ground taxi in this aircraft. And I want to point out the hover controls. You can see that there are two dots on that vertical scale that's moving right there in the middle. My throttle inputs, or my left-hand inceptor inputs, is the white dot. I'm trying to tell the Joby, hey, I want you to get the power or input up to about here. And the blue or the red dot, depending on what's happening, is the Joby basically saying, okay, I'm going to try and respond to your input and adjust either battery expenditure, engine nacelle angle, propeller power, whatever it takes to get to meet your white dot target. So I'm telling it to give me, a walking pace of about 3 or 4 knots taxi speed, and it's going to try and do it by adjusting the nacelles, increasing engine power. And the reason it's bouncing up and down is because I'm currently also squeezing the spade grip on the wheel brakes so that we have a controlled roll all the way up to the hold short line. Okay, so we're going to cut power here for a minute. That's the other thing that I want to point out about left-hand inceptor power inputs. Because these are electric motors, they are extremely responsive. You cut power to them, they will spin down, not instantaneously, but close enough. Certainly a lot more instantaneously than a conventionally powered aircraft that you might be used to flying. So you cut the power, it'll cut power real fast. You apply power, there's hardly any latency on it at all. There's hardly any performance gap. So that's a great characteristic of this aircraft, which to me helps define the Joby, honestly, as one of the few eVTOLs on the market that I would be comfortable calling pilot's plane, because it's really responsive. It The controls, once you get used to them, are really simple. The engines respond like a champ, very instantaneous. And not too many people know this looking at the specifications, but you actually are looking at 180 knot true aircraft. It is fast. Granted, you're going to chew up your battery power in that process, but on a very short trip, you can hit 180 knots and still arrive safely over the high fix at your destination with plenty of battery power for a safety margin. Granted, that's not the mission concept. It's an air taxi, so it's going to get you there fairly quickly, but safely, comfortably. But if you wanted to do speed runs in the Joby, you absolutely can. All right, so I mentioned earlier that we're going to leave the left-hand inceptor, as I said, in the midpoint, and we're going to do a vertical takeoff. You don't need to provide any inputs at all on the left-hand inceptor when you're in hover mode. All you've got to do is manipulate your takeoff using the right-hand inceptor. One last thing before we do that. On the scoreboard annunciator, there is a indication in white that is armed. TRC, Translational Rate Control. This is a built-in fly-by-wire safety control, flight mode. It's basically a flight set of rules that enable you to do very restrictive but extremely precise maneuvering while you're in hover mode. TRC is always armed when you're on the ground, and if it happens to fail, that's an immediate land situation, because TRC provides the stability that you need in hover mode in order to be able to fly this aircraft within limits safely and controllably. So TRC is currently armed. LHI, left-hand inceptor, is in midpoint. We're going to just simply pull back, and I'm going to change the view just a tad. And I'm going to pull back. And there we go. We have a vertical takeoff, folks. Now, I'd like to point out you are not translating anywhere. You are not maneuvering. You are not translating forward. You are not translating back. You are not side slipping. You are not yawing. You are hovering directly over the takeoff spot that you left. And this aircraft will hold this position, all things considered, until the battery is exhausted. And notice TRC is now active. It's turned from white to green, indicating that it's in control. This, folks, is what makes the Joby a gem to fly. I've flown helicopters a lot. I don't know about you. It's easy to get frustrated flying a helicopter. It's hard. There's just no question about it. You can do things in the Joby that will take you a long time to do in a helicopter, and you can do them never having flown a helicopter before or the Joby before. Case in point, I'm going to basically press on what would be the torque pedals in a helicopter. In this case, they can be mapped to your rudder pedals, or I have a twist function joystick, so I've mapped the rudder axis to the twist axis, and I am performing essentially a rudder torque turn. And I am not moving forward, I am not moving back, I am not climbing, I am not descending. I am simply maneuvering in this plane. This is the kind of stuff that you could not do in a helicopter easily the first few times you'd fly it. So I can change my nose heading very easily. We can side slip. Simply turn the right-hand inceptor, bank it as if you were trying to do an aileron turn in conventional flight, and hold it there. You are translating right. You are not climbing. You are not descending. Your nose heading is remaining relatively stable. You are not yawing. Release the inceptor. The Joby will stop. Other way, same deal. There you go. You want to descend? Push down. Want to ascend again? Pull back. You can combine all of these. You can combine all of these maneuvers as you want. I can turn and descend. I can side slip and climb. Now, you probably noticed your battery power expenditure screen is showing several different things. Obviously, we are expending battery power. We're now down to 87%. The health of the energy draw, the range, and the endurance are reflected in various colors. Energy draw will show green, amber, red. So right now, staying in a hover position of any kind, whether we're moving or not, is drawing a fairly large amount of power out of the batteries. So that of course makes sense. You're burning a lot of battery power to try and stay in position. All right, let's go and translate forward a little bit. Now I will move the left-hand inceptor forward. You can see that on the hover controls. The white dot is the left-hand inceptor, and the blue dot is, of course, the target. And we're moving forward at about 9 knots. You can remain in TRC, or translational rate control, up to about 30 to 40 knots, after which the aircraft will try to translate to forward flight. But for now, a very docile 12-knot forward translation. No problem. Let's try some conventional flying. Let's move up a little faster. For that, there's 2 ways to do this. There is a control at the end of the inceptor, right about where your thumb would land. We have an auto throttle of sorts. It's actually a speed acceleration deceleration nubbin, and if you move it forward, you will increase speed, and the immediate first stop in increment is 50 knots, after which every push of the nubbin forward increases your airspeed about 10 knots in 10-knot increments up to the maximum 180. For simplicity's sake, I mapped this to my indicated airspeed knob. Many of you have dedicated controls. You can choose to do, you can map it to however you like. The command that I used is IAS increase or decrease. So as you can see, I'm clicking up on my IAS knob, and I'm going to bring us up to a more helicopter-like 70 knots. And now you can see TRC has reverted back to armed, and we are now, instead of hover, we are now in speed mode. The flight controls output has also changed. You are now seeing a more conventional aircraft depiction, and the target for the LHI remains. But the battery power, of course, is much grateful for this change. You see the energy draw dropped down to a more reasonable green health indication, and we're drawing only about 200 or so kilowatts, and our energy will be preserved at this point. Our endurance has jumped up, and so has our range capability. In speed mode, and I'll just get us up to 110 knots or so that we can maneuver a little bit. The controls operate as you would expect. The left-hand inceptor, as I said, it acts more like a conventional throttle. Full forward is max power. Full aft is minimum power. The right-hand inceptor operates just as you would expect it would in a conventional aircraft. Pull back, you will pitch up. Push down, you will pitch down. Banking. performs an aileron roll. And as you can see, the nacelles have transitioned to full forward to support the fixed wing flight. Um, Also, you may have noticed this before, in hover mode, here's yet another user interface cue that we built. In hover mode, the V-bar directors were colored gray. That's yet another instinctive cue to tell you that you're in hover mode. In forward flight mode, if nothing else, if none of these indications are making it to you, the V-bars in cyan are also yet another indication that you are in forward flight. The aircraft itself does not have an autopilot. At the time that we built the aircraft, Joby did not have an autopilot integrated into the aircraft, although we are told that they eventually will from a production perspective before it becomes a full-fledged air taxi taking passengers for hire. But at the moment, there is no autopilot. However, there are some automation help features that I'd like to point out now in this video, especially in forward flight. You saw the speed assistance, which is this auto throttle nub in here. You pull back, it'll drop by 10 knots. You push forward, it'll increase airspeed by 10 knots. And you can leave the throttle in almost any position above midpoint, and the auto throttle will adjust it accordingly without you actually having to maneuver the LHI. Now, in order to hold a particular speed, so we're at 120 knots, you actually do need to move the LHI back. And as you can see, the speed indicator briefly disappeared and then came back. And now that the LHI is in midpoint, it's going to hold approximately that 120 knots. I picked up a little bit of speed in the process of moving back the LHI. That's why it's at 127. But now that it's in that position, I can drop it to 110. A nice even number, and it'll stay there because the LHI is in speed hold position at this point because it's at the midpoint of your throttle axis. Now we're at about 1,400 feet, just about to break 1,500, so let's level off. There's a level button. You can map it to your controls if you so desire. I use the standard SIM keybind for level hold, and I mapped it to the level button on my general aviation avionics panel. So I hit level and it'll hold the current altitude that you're at. And so this is some automation to help pilots on longer distance routes, although again, concept of operations, the Joby is an air taxi. They don't really see it exceeding more than 20-30 minutes flight at the most before you're at your destination. So the pilot workload, all things considered, will probably be very minimal, even if you choose not to use any of these automation functions. But we wanted to point these out so that people understand that these tools are available to ease off pilot workload. And what's nice about it is you can now fly hands off, relatively speaking, and enjoy the view. Turn around, look out the windows. Yeah, it's a great view. I mean, this bubble canopy is very extensive. Great pilot visibility all around. Okay. Last thing, let's go turn around. You can see by banking I've automatically disabled level. I can certainly bring it back anytime, but we're going to hand fly it and turn it around for a minute and head back towards the airport because we're heading a little bit too far offshore. Okay. All right, let's try and get back to the airfield, which is way in the distance. Oh, what we can also do is do a field landing. This is the beautiful thing about a VTOL, about a vertical takeoff and landing vehicle. You are not constrained by requiring to have a conventional landing surface available to you. You can land pretty much anywhere. There's a safe level spot with enough clearance, safety for your rotor size footprint, which in this case is fairly extensive, but honestly, not much more different than a medium-sized helicopter once you translate back to hover mode, and these large propellers are now oriented in a mostly vertical position. So the clearance requirement isn't that big. So we can potentially just put it down. And so one of the things that I did want to point out is speed management is a little tough because you need to try and get your speed down to below 50 knots. If you wanted to do this in a hurry, you could. And I'll just point out this control right here. There's a decel button directly underneath the throttle nubbin, and it operates in two ways. One is a short press. Once, you'll see the speed is now replaced by a decel to hover. And we're going to put it into a descent. Not too scary. Notice that I got a warning that said my pitch rate was too high.
500.
To support a decel to hover. So I need to adjust the pitch a little bit. So about 300 feet is what I would aim for as a reference going forward. And you can see, without touching the left-hand inceptor at all, or touching any of the auto throttle nubbin, the Joby immediately throttled down the aircraft to under 50 knots and put us back into hover mode. This is actually pretty useful if you needed to decelerate in a hurry and your target landing spot was coming up real fast. So that's one way to do it. And we'll show you the other piece in a second. I'll just need to program the FMS so that we have a waypoint in the flight plan. And I'll just plug in. Actually, add destination. Enter. And we'll just simply do a direct to. And there we go. And so I brought us back to speed mode, taking us out of hover. That's the airfield that we departed from, directly ahead. And what's going to happen is that instead of using decel to hover, you can use decel to hover if you'd like. You can manually calculate roughly when you're going to be overhead the airfield and press the button. And the flight data will actually tell you required distance to hover and the required time that the aircraft needs in order to get you into a hover state based currently on your speed and altitude. And that's fine. That's not a problem. You can do that manually. What you also can do, and I'm just trying to get us down to a reasonable 110, 120 knots speed so I can show you what's going to happen. You can long press on this button, and as long as you have a waypoint that is a valid airfield object in your flight plan as the next waypoint in your plan, hold down this button, and instead of decelerate to hover, you're going to get a decelerate to waypoint. And what that does is that, all things considered, given your current speed, altitude, and heading, it's going to calculate roughly when you're going to be at closest to this waypoint. It helps that you're heading directly to that point. You're on course, like you're on the magenta line like I am right now. And it will bring you to a hover approximately in 0.7 nautical miles and less than 49 seconds. And it will be roughly directly over that point in the moving map. Now, for the most part, that's the midpoint of the field as a map object and not a helipad or a specific ramp spot. But it's still a very useful automation tool so that you don't have to manage roughly when you need to switch to hover mode. It's going to kick you into hover mode right now in about 20 seconds as soon as I get over this particular point. And you saw the aircraft yaw a little bit as it switched to hover mode. And there we are. We're back in hover mode, and we are directly over the airfield. I honestly, this is a very easy aircraft to fly. Once you've learned all of these little tricks and you've gotten used to how the left hand and right hand inceptors work depending on which mode of flight you're in, it works amazingly well, and you'll have a lot of fun. You can imagine in TRC how much easier it's going to be for you to try and pick a very tiny landing spot. Let's say the famous landing pad on the top of the Al Burj Hotel in Dubai, or for example, that scary looking mesh helipad on top of the Eddystone Lighthouse off the coast of the United Kingdom. So here we are. We're going to just descend, add a little bit of forward translation so we're over the ramp. And then I'm going to bring it back, bring the LHI back as I'm descending so that we stop forward translation. And if we look down, yep, we're over the ramp. Not exactly over a spot, but close enough. And I'm just going to get the aircraft down, put weight on wheels, bring the LHI back, cut power. Once the aircraft detects weight on wheels, it will cut power to all 6 engines. It does help though, that way you don't have an inadvertent power input at the last second that throws you off, to immediately cut power using the LHI as well. And that, folks, is the Joby S4. I hope you find this video useful, and please consider clicking subscribe. I do not monetize this channel. The only reason I'm suggesting you do so is I'll be putting up other videos with the other eVTOLs in Microsoft Flight Simulator in similar fashion, orientation flights using those air vehicles as well. So I hope you found this useful. Have a safe and great day, and we'll see you soon.